Okay, so this is continuing with Chapter 9, Lesson 5. So this is Part 2. I was working out number 6D. Remember in this first row, I had made a mistake when I was writing down the answer. X squared times 3 is 3x squared, not just 3x. So writing out the completed answer, we have x to the fourth. And then we need our x cubed terms. We have 3x cubed minus x cubed is going to be 2x cubed. And then our squared terms, we have negative x squared minus 3x squared plus 3x squared. So that's going to be a negative x squared. Sorry, let me fix that x there. And then our x terms, we have x and 9x. So that is going to be 10x. And then we also have a negative 3. So that is going to be our answer, working it out by the grid method. We can also work this problem out just multiplying it out, but then you have to be very careful because it's easy to leave out one of the terms. So let me work out this problem the other way. So we're going to do 6D again, only this time we're going to work it out just writing out the answer as we go rather than using the grid. So x squared minus x plus 3. So this was the problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take x squared and multiply it by every term in the second parentheses. X squared times x squared is x to the fourth. X squared times negative x is negative x cubed. X squared times 3 is 3x squared. I know that it's positive because my x squared is positive and my 3 is positive, so the product has to be positive. Okay, so I've done my first term. Now I'm going to do my second term. 3x times x squared is 3x cubed. 3x times negative x is negative 3x squared. 3x times 3 is 9x. Okay, more to go. Negative 1 times x squared is negative x squared because this is a negative 1. Negative 1 times negative x is going to be positive x because negative times negative is positive. Now we have negative 1 times 3, and that's negative 3. Okay, so we know that we're going to start off with an x to the fourth term. Now I'm going to triple underline all my x cubed terms. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and that's all of my x cubed terms. So I have negative x cubed and positive 3x cubed. That is positive 2x cubed. Now I'm going to double underline all my x squared terms. So there's an x squared, and there's an x squared, and there's an x squared. So I have 3x squared minus 3x squared, that's 0x squareds. And then I have minus x squared. So that is negative x squared. Now I'm going to single underline all my x terms. So I have 9x and I have x. 9x plus x, that is 10x. And then I still have a negative 3. And I will flip back to my previous page and you will see the same answer. X to the fourth plus 2x cubed minus x squared plus 10x minus 3. So let me come back here, and you can see it is the same answer, which is what it should be. Okay, so that is how you can work this kind of problem out without doing the grid. Just be very careful. It is easy to leave a term out, and because you have to find your like terms scattered in amongst each other, it's also really easy, even if you get everything multiplied out, it's also really easy to leave out one of your terms when you're adding things together. So I do recommend, especially for the big problems, that you use the grid method. Okay, I'm going to do just one more from number 6. I'm going to do part F. Part F is x minus 1 times x minus 2 times x minus 3. Now, we cannot do this whole problem in one step. We can only multiply two things at a time. So I'm going to start off by multiplying these first two together. So I'm going to use my grid because I like my grid. And then let me put in my crossbars. Okay, so we have x minus 1 and x minus 2. X times x is x squared. x times negative 2 is negative 2x. In this bottom box, negative 1 times x is negative x. Bottom right box, negative 1 times negative 2 is a positive 2. Remember, each square is going to be the product of the term at the start of its row and the term at the start of its column. So x times x is x squared. Okay, now we need to add all this up. Notice that our diagonal terms are both x's. So x minus 1 times x minus 2 is x squared. Negative 2x minus x, that is negative 3x. And then we have a plus 2 at the end. That's just these first two parentheses multiplied by each other. I still need to multiply this by x minus 3. So I'm going to put parentheses around this and write times x minus 3. So now I need to make a new grid to work this problem out. So I'm going to make a new grid. Okay, now I'm going to put in my grid lines. And you can see I made this taller than I made it wide. So I'm going to put my 3 terms across going down the side. And I'm going to have x squared, negative 3x, and 2. And at the top I'm going to have x and negative 3. This first one is going to be x cubed because x squared times x is x cubed. The top right box is going to be x squared times negative 3. That is negative 3x squared. This middle box on the left is going to be negative 3x times x. That is negative 3x squared. The middle box on the right is going to be negative 3x times negative 3, which is a positive 9x because negative times negative is positive. Bottom left box, 2 times x is 2x. Bottom right box, 2 times negative 3 is a negative 6. Okay, so now it's time to add all of this together. Notice that these two terms in these diagonal boxes are both x squared terms, so they can be added together. And these terms in these two diagonal boxes are both x terms, so they can be added together. So I'm going to start off on the top left, and I have x cubed. And then I have negative 3x squared minus 3x squared. That is negative 6x squared. I have 9x and 2x. I had 9 x's. I got 2 more. That means I have 11 of those x's. And then I still have a negative 6 over here. So this is our answer, x cubed minus 6x squared plus 11x minus 6. So the grid method, very handy. It puts all your terms in a nice, neat, orderly fashion so it's easy to get them all written down. It's easy to organize them all together to get your final answer. Okay, so that was number 6, which is just like number 10 in the homework. One last problem, I'm going to do number 7. Number 7 is just like number 11 that I assigned for the homework. It says multiply each of the following polynomials by x minus 1. So I'm going to write mult by x minus 1. So whatever part we have, we're going to multiply that by x minus 1. So part A, we have x plus 1, and we want to multiply it by x minus 1. I'm going to do a box, of course, because I like my box. And I'm going to put in my grid lines. So here's our grid lines. And I will put x and minus 1 over here, and x and plus 1 over here. X times x is x squared. X times 1 is x. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Notice I have both of my x terms in diagonal boxes, so I can add those together. My answer is x squared minus 1. Because I have my x squared term here, I have x minus x is 0, so I have no x term. And then I have a minus 1. So the answer is x squared minus 1. Now part B, I have x squared plus x plus 1. And I need to multiply that, whoops, I left out the 1. I need to multiply that by x minus 1. So I'm going to make a grid. And I'm going to put in my grid lines. Not very evenly spaced, but we can deal with that. So I have x minus 1, and then I have x squared, x, and 1. That's from my first parentheses. So now I'm going to multiply this out. X times x squared is x cubed because we add our exponents, and just an x means that it's really x to the first power. So this is also an x to the first power. X times x, that is x squared. X times 1, that is x. Negative 1 times x squared is negative x squared. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. We have x squared terms in diagonal boxes. We have x terms in diagonal boxes. Notice what we get for our answer. We get x cubed minus 1 because our x squared has a minus x squared, and that is 0. Our x term, there's also a negative x term. X minus x is 0. So all we're left with is x cubed minus 1. So what you need to do for number 7 is continue working out the parts that it has and see if you notice a pattern. So notice for the first one we had x squared minus 1. For the second one we have x cubed minus 1. I'm going to go to a new page and I'm going to skip down to part D, which is x to the 4th plus x cubed plus x squared plus x plus 1. And I'm going to multiply that by x minus 1. And let's see what that turns out to be. So let me make a big grid box here. Okay. And I need to have a bunch of these up here. You know what? I'm going to write these up at the top first. X to the 4th, x cubed, x squared, x, and 1. And now I'll put my grids in so I know I have enough room. Okay, so now I'm going to draw in all my grid lines. Okay, so they're not exactly straight, but they're good enough. Okay, and then we have x and minus 1 for the left side. X times x to the 4th is x to the 5th. X times x cubed is x to the 4th. X times x squared is x cubed. X times x is x squared. X times 1 is just an x. Second row is negative 1 times x to the 4th is negative x to the 4th. Negative 1 times x cubed is negative x cubed. Negative 1 times x squared is negative x squared. Negative 1 times x is negative x. And negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Notice diagonal boxes have the same degree term here. Whoops, I just crossed out my negative. And so you can see we have an x to the 4th and a minus x to the 4th. That's 0. An x cubed and a negative x cubed. That's 0. X squared minus x squared. That's 0. X minus x. That's 0. So we end up with x to the 5th minus 1. So notice that when we had x plus 1 times x minus 1, we got x squared minus 1. When we started with an x squared term, we ended up with an x cubed minus 1. Over here, when we started with an x to the 4th term, we ended up with x to the 5th minus 1. Make that a 5. So what do you think we're going to get if we start with an x to the 10th term, like this? Plus x to the 6th, plus x to the 5th, plus x to the 4th, whoops, plus x cubed, plus x squared, plus x plus 1. If we multiply this whole thing by x minus 1, what do you think we're going to get? I will tell you we will end up with x to the 11th minus 1 because it will follow the same pattern. Now the pattern you're going to get is probably going to be different because you are going to be given polynomials that you multiply by x plus 1, not x minus 1. So your answer for part D is part E, is probably going to be different. This is part E down here. So work through all these problems. This is for chapter 9, lesson 5.